The panel we have scheduled for this morning is a fascinating one, and the panelists we have are eminently qualified to actually probe into some of the issues. But before we start, I'll do the same thing that I did during the Regulators Forum and remind not only the speakers on the panel, but also those in the audience, that we operate under the Chatham House rule. It's a simple rule, but it essentially says use whatever you want and whatever you hear in this session. The only thing you can't do is attribute it. You can't attribute it to the individual or the organization, the person who said that. So that said, it usually creates a terrifically vibrant session because there's a lot of candor, there's a lot of frankness, and as I said, to operate under the Chatham House rule would be most helpful. Just so you know, the format of the next roughly 90 minutes or so will be, we'll have prepared remarks, and I'll try to make it as simple as possible, just so the panel does know. I'm going to work from my right, your left, all the way over to this side. So we'll go in sequence, and hopefully the prepared remarks will be somewhat limited. We'd like to keep them between 7 to 8 or 9 minutes, with an opportunity to hopefully open it up for questions. If there's something that you find is absolutely compelling that's just been said, I'm going to actually, and I haven't told the panel this yet, but I'm going to say, raise your hand. You know, to the extent we can capture the thought in the moment, we'll do it. We'll capture that. So it's going to make it a little bit more lively than just marching through a series of presentations. Now, to the extent there's no interruptions, that would be terrific because it's a lot easier to present if I can start and finish. The key that we'd like to stick with is the purpose of this panel really is for you. And to, as I said, probe those particular issues. One of the things I'll do now is I will introduce our panel, and I will do it again in the same order that they will speak. Because this is a remarkably friendly panel, I am going to keep to first names only. If you'd like to read bios and more detail about the individuals, it's on the IIC website. And you're obviously more than welcome to do that. So, all the way over on my right, your left, is Andrew. Andrew's the head of trade and economic affairs, Asia Pac for Google. He leads policy engagements for the entire region. He was previously managing director of Ogilvy Earth Australia Sustainable Consultancy. Previously, he was a diplomat with the Australian government, where he worked on climate change. Angie, next one over. Angie is a regulatory and public policy communications lawyer for more than 14 years. Most recently, her work supports, and this is important, her most recent work supports IoT. So that's one of the elements that we'll probably start poking around with this particular discussion. She is supporting Vodafone's IoT strategy and participates in the public policy discussions that she has, various regulators throughout Asia Pac. To my left, your right, is Commissioner Lee. Yes, I did say first names, and I do respect. So I will refer to you as Commissioner Lee. Commissioner Lee has been with the KCC, which is the Korea Competition Commission, the Korea Communications Commission, since April of 2014, and he began his career in public service in 1982. At the Ministry of Communications, a predecessor to the KCC. Prior, Commissioner Lee worked for the World Bank as a senior information officer, and in 2012 was appointed president of the Korea Internet and Security Agency. Again, a very, very interesting piece of experience that we'll bring to the discussion. On his left, your right, is Mohammed. He holds the position of Chief Corporate Affairs and Strategy Officer for Telenor Pakistan. Prior to that, he was a center director, which in other parlances would be called the CEO of the Pacific ICT Regulatory Resource Center, or if I can pronounce it right, Pirik, in Suava, Fiji. He was involved in a World Bank project, making him responsible for the work with all Pacific ICT regulators and ministries. He has also worked in Bangladesh for 5 years, advising on legal, regulatory, and stakeholder management matters. All the way over on the my far left, your far right, is Johan. Johan is a senior telecoms executive with more than 20 years of experience working and doing business in Asia. He has been president and country manager in a number of countries, including, and this is quite impressive list, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Hong Kong, and Myanmar. He has been involved with M&A work in Northeast Asia. Currently, he has government and industry relations, advising governments in the region on policy and regulatory matters, and driving Ericsson's vision of the network society. Again, another very, very important piece of experience in this. So that said, what I'd like to do is get into the specifics of this particular session. And what I'd like to do is give a little bit of tone and a little bit of color to the subject, if I could. And in the process of doing that, hopefully throw out or throw up some questions that might be addressed by our illustrious panelists. If you look behind me, I will look over to the side. If you look actually at the title of this session, the way I read it, there are really 3 words in the title that are important: transformation, value, and opportunity. Those are the 3 key things. When I had discussions prior with the panelists, the focus was really on transformation. I would venture to say every person in this room would agree that the industry is going through stupendous transformation, maybe to a degree that we've never seen before. The operative word, though, if it's transformation, is what is being transformed. So the question that I hope we'll get to is not only do we want to hear about companies being transformed, but markets are being transformed, policies are being transformed. So there is a terrific amount of pressure that's involving all stakeholders of the market in terms of this shift that's going on. If we're adding value, that was the second word I thought was important in this particular title. For who? And I'm going to leave it at that. Who are we adding value to? When I worked in Singapore, one of the responsibilities I oversaw was the policy area. And I had a very, very strong view that policy was driven by 5 separate stakeholders. So the who might involve those 5. And if anybody's interested in the 5, I'll share later with what I always considered the 5 separate stakeholders of almost any policy issue that affects the industry. The third word was opportunity. So if we have transition going on, what can those being transformed expect? What do they want? What are they looking for? We have insurgents in the market. We have people that are new to the market. And I don't want to get too, I don't, but the panelists surely can, too specific and too granular at this stage, where we're talking about or involving our discussion in, whether it's this particular OTT operator or this particular aspect of the market. But the question should be, if there's opportunity, who is in fact getting that opportunity? Now, I would hope, strongly hope, that the discussion that we have over the next few minutes doesn't focus strictly on what I'll call telecommunications, the telecommunications side, because quite honestly, we have as much transformation going on the broadcast side of the industry. So if you look at and I have a tendency to say, if I have telecoms and broadcast, actually the 3, there's telecoms, broadcast, and information. But if I had telecoms and broadcast, they work their way up to something called communications. So if we stick to the fact that we're impacting the communications side of society, then the question then becomes, who is getting the opportunity, or where does the opportunity lie? I would hope that we actually just talk a bit about the need for cooperation. Remember I said there are 5 stakeholders. To me, the cooperation has to sit among those 5 separate people, 5 separate groups. They're not people, but they're 5 separate groups that actually need to cooperate. Is the cooperation domestic? Is it within your singular economy? Is it regional? We talked a bit about this during the regulators forum. Is it with just your neighbors? Meaning if you've got a certain number of countries that you neighbor, do I only have to deal with them? But in terms of cooperation, we also have to discuss cooperation with market participants. So they're players in the market. And I would venture to say most people, when they hear the word market participants, they automatically think consumer. Actually, there are at least 2 more stakeholders that you have to worry about in terms of market participants, at least 2. And so I'm trying to, if I can, elevate the discussion, and then what we'll do is get into very specific things. We talk about something, and I've heard this yesterday, and actually for the preceding day, something called the regulator. I'm leaning on the English word spelled with an OR at the end. Actually, I think that generally implies an institution or an organization. I want you to think, when you think of regulator, to think of anybody who has an impact or can set rules. Anybody. It could be policymakers, it could be the legislature, it could be the executive branch of a government, but it could be anybody. Absolutely. So let's not use, hopefully, the term regulator as much as we might want to use the word rule maker. So in terms of the rule maker, what should the rule maker be involved with? It still is, I believe, a regulated industry. Both sides, both broadcast and telecoms. So to the extent it remains a regulated industry, we have to be sensitive to the rule maker, whoever that happens to be. We're moving into, and bear with me, because every time I hear this word, it's actually a phrase, my eyes roll. But we're moving into a new economy. So my eyes just rolled. What is this new economy? So we're talking about things like the shared economy. I had a wonderful discussion with a good friend who is a very, very, actually remarkably well-known economist, a global economist. And he had some of the funniest definitions of this thing called the shared economy. But as we get into this discussion, this transformation, we can't avoid talking about the shared economy. I mean, it's going to be a given. To the extent the panel decides not to, I'll ask them. So trust me, we're going to dig into this thing called the shared economy. Maybe by the end of the session, we'll have a definition for what is, and so my economist friend can actually say, geez, you almost got it. So I'd like to pose one question, and if it's not answered by the panelists individually, I'm going to ask it at the end, presuming we have time, or maybe you should ask it. Who, in your mind, has gotten it right in terms of transforming from where we were to where we're going? So if you can pick, and I know this can be a bit of a provocative point, but if you could pick one economy that you think has got it right, or mostly right, which one would that be? So I think it's an interesting point, and quite frankly, you don't even have to name the economy if you don't want to name the economy, but you could say, this is what this particular economy actually did and why I think it's actually a good one. So with that,
happy to see that connectivity is still big on agenda for Google as well. Happy to help there. Yes, so I would be glad to share Vodafone's experience in sort of market transformation, and yeah, I can't agree more that the market is definitely transforming. And we as a global carrier, as mobile and fixed and nomadic connectivity provider, do see new technologies emerging. We do see innovative services emerging, and we do see innovative business models emerging as well. And we as a company not just see that, we actually actively participate in it. So we often see ourselves no longer as the pipe provider as it used to be, We do see that we enter the new era, new services, new markets where we compete with Google, where we compete with Facebook, where we compete with OTTs, as well as, of course, we provide the connectivity. So it is definitely a huge transformation, and we are absolutely happy seeing that. And I think there's a lot of sort of public policy takeouts that I will touch upon a bit later. And specifically, I will focus on the Internet of Things, which is extremely important for Vodafone as a global company. And I'll mention a little bit of our experience in that field. Now, despite of the overall transformation and changes in the market, we believe in connectivity as the core of our business. And we believe in a gigabit society. Maybe some participants from Europe will know. We recently published a huge study on gigabit society in Europe with Orchard Little, where we've looked at various sectors, healthcare sector, energy and utility sector, media and entertainment, education sector, retail sector, public sector. And we basically believe that all of these sectors, businesses and homes in these sectors, would benefit from the gigabit society, which would provide a world of instantaneous services, enable new range of applications, and help collaboration, productivity, and entertainment. So that is, because we are a European company, that is a European focus. However, globally, we do believe that high throughputs, high speeds will benefit society overall globally. Now, IoT is definitely one of the huge interests for Vodafone. And I'm very happy to say that recently in September, Machina Research published their study on the IoT. And they named Vodafone as a consistent global leader for IoT. So I'm very happy and proud to say that. Now, on the IoT field, I'm sure you will be aware of the sort of sectors and markets where IoT has been usually used in. Manufacturing, automotive sector, remote monitoring, health propositions, and similar. Definitely, we are active in all of these sectors. Now, one of the examples I wanted to use recently, which really made me laugh, when I was talking to our IoT colleagues, I said, what is the new proposition you have right now? And they mentioned a moo call, which is actually a cow proposition. For farmers, that is the equipment that is installed in the cows, and it measures when the cow is about to give birth, and it gives the signal to the farmer when she's having contractions. And it reduces the death rate in the calves, basically. So that is one of the IoT propositions, right? So I was just interested in sort of new approaches to market and IoT services. Now, once a year, we actually do the assessment of our IoT customers, and we do the survey with our IoT customers. And interestingly, I must say this year, the outcome of the survey was that today the companies realize that IoT is no longer in the level of adaptation, it's no longer a new way of doing business. They absolutely realize the value that IoT brings for their businesses. So we've noticed that there's a very, very high level of companies that see IoT today as critical to their businesses. 84% of the companies said that it is critical, and then 96% have increased IoT spend in the last 12 months. And what is interesting also to see is we asked how much of the IT budget they spend on the IoT, and it was 24%, which is today equal to cloud computing and data analytics. So it's just an example of our IoT barometer of our IoT global customers. Now, to move to the regulatory side of it, we as Vodafone believe that industry has to be proactive in shaping the public policy environment in which we operate. So we do work a lot with public policy stakeholders. In particular, in Europe, we work a lot with European Commission, with BEREC, with Alliance of Internet of Things and Innovation, with various regulators, and we work with regulators here in this region as well, and various industry representatives as well. So we believe that there needs to be a proactive collaboration between the regulators, public policy makers, and the industry to make this whole transformation work. Now, we believe that the policies that support harmonization investment, that stimulate demand, and that facilitate the border-free feature of the IoT should be adapted. And I guess you would say, well, yeah, that's a generic comment. I would say, to be a bit more specific, I cannot agree more with Andrew on the cross-border data flows. That is absolutely essential, I think, and any policies, and we do see those trends in this region, unfortunately, in some countries, where governments impose data localization requirements. This is a very, very huge restriction for cloud-based services, extremely. We see that a lot. Licensing is another area, and I know the regulators here look at it as well. And for example, IoT services, I believe, should not be licensed in any way, specifically. Numbering resources, we've noticed as a telco, I guess, we've noticed that sometimes there are restrictions in using global numbering ranges to provide services. So, for example, permanent roaming sometimes is a concern. We definitely do not support any restrictions on that. We sometimes also see that the end-user-oriented policies are sort of being applied to business-only ICT solutions and services. So we believe that that should be also by the regulators, should be looked at separately and differently. Like end-user registration requirements for IoT SIM that sits in the fridge is a complex one to comply with. So I guess just to sort of conclude, we believe that the market should be let to develop itself, should be let to compete, and the regulators should address the problems as and when they appear. Definitely when there are competition concerns, definitely those should be addressed. Consumer protection, definitely, we absolutely understand that. And we do support that. So another area where we always raise is the technology neutral approach. Often the frameworks are there and they can be applied. I do understand the technologies are very complex and the businesses are different, services are very complex. But often the frameworks are there already, and we do not often need to prepare specific policies to address specific services. So in general, what we actually presented to BEREC a few weeks ago was regulate with a trembling hand. And in fact, I'm really happy to see that BEREC's, for example, BEREC's conclusion on the IoT was do not interfere at this stage, watch the space. And if there are competition concerns or consumer protection concerns in that case, yes, do step in. So we are fully supportive of that. And I'm very happy from yesterday's discussions with Sir
Oh, Stephen.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Dr. Stephen. Dr. Stephen mentioned yesterday that there is a need for new approaches to regulation, and he mentioned collaboration, which I completely agree with. And we think, and in particular in this region as well, we do see some regulators in some of the markets that do take this approach of collaboration rather than imposing policies and then seeing how it goes. So I think that definitely is one of the areas where we do support as well.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We are, believe it or not, right on time. Commissioner Lee. Yes.
Thank you, Andrew. It's my pleasure to be here this morning with all of you. I will focus on Internet of Things that is transforming current ICT industry rapidly. First, I would like to introduce briefly my view of this subject, and then I will share a Korean case and experience. Well, well, we cannot view IoT as simply another technological development, but rather we should see them as social transformation. As IoT and big data have become part of our everyday lives, intelligent convergence services like smart home, smart healthcare, self-driving cars are becoming more prevalent, providing various economic values and increased efficiency and convenience. Additionally, smart sensors are connecting all things, enabling communication between people and things, as well as information sharing between things. This is bringing about an industrial, socio-economic, and technological revolution, as well as growth. IoT counters the effects of low growth, aging society to strengthen the competitiveness of the global community. I think it is a core component in leading industry revolution 4.0. Over the last several decades, we have had several ICT innovations that have caused quantum leap in our society. For IoT to lead the next quantum jump, companies, academia, and the government need to cooperate to make IoT a growth engine for the future. Finally, to ensure we don't lose the industrial, socio-economic, and technological benefits that IoT have to offer, we must respond to issues of privacy breaches and cybersecurity. And now I would like to discuss the direction of the Korean smart market with a focus on the Internet of Things, and share how the Korean government and businesses are working to create a value in response to market changes. With the competition to commercialize the Internet of Small Things, that is IOST, intensifying, IoT lines account for 8.2% out of total mobile communications lines as of February 2016. On average, there are 100,000 more dedicated IoT subscriber lines every month, and the demand for IoT is exploding in various aspects of daily life. The background for Korea's acceleration towards a smart society can be explained by the following. First, Korea's 3 telcos have built a network for the Internet of Small Things with small-sized data transmission, optimized with various sensors and remote metering systems. Furthermore, they are taking advantage of new opportunities for value creation as they compete to discover consumer-oriented services such as smart home and smart healthcare. Second, in March 2016, Samsung, the telco SKT, and the local metropolitan government started co-work to build an IoT testbed in Daegu, an area where self-driving cars are a strategic industry. I think this is one example of efforts to expand IoT infrastructure and service through collaboration between government and businesses. And the Korean government created a national strategy to lay the foundation to create the IoT smart market all on and promote relevant services. While in Korea, the government and enterprises are encountering new opportunities and challenges, as they actively work to quickly transition to a smart society where all things are connected. The efforts to create new industry value through IoT can be characterized by the following 4 areas. First one is to strengthen IoT infrastructure. I think network infrastructure must be sound for the safe provision of smart services. First, with respect to spectrum management, Korea conducted a spectrum auction of the LTE 140 MHz band and raised the frequency power limit of the 900 MHz band to respond to the exponential increase in IoT traffic. Second, in order to achieve high speed, low latency, hyperconnectivity, there is a need for policy which promotes development of new mobile technology like 5G. In Korea, we are planning to introduce fully commercialized service by December 2020. Second thing is I would like to mention is regulatory improvements for new industry like IoT. New industries such as remote medical services and self-driving cars are known for conflicting with existing laws and regulations, and there are increasing costs to improve current regulations to provide more innovative services. However, reaching a societal consensus is proving difficult. And then, Korean government recently formed a new industry investment committee managed by the private sector in this year. This committee uses a negative screening to innovate regulations in an expedient manner. I think this is a typical example of collaboration between central government and businesses. Third one is embedded IoT security based on industry cooperation. I think IoT can be a very important opportunities, but I think we are encounter challenges and crises like cybersecurity and privacy issues. In today's environment, more and more IoT sensors and devices are connected to provide customized services. If these sensors or devices are infected by malware, this could lead to data leaks or service failure and even threaten the life and safety of the user. In order to strengthen the security of diverse and complicated IoT services, close cooperation between manufacturers, telcos, service providers, and security firms is becoming essential. In Korea, last year, we formed the IoT Security Alliance, composed of approximately 40 entities from industry, academia, and public institutions, including IoT manufacturers, service providers, and security firms. This voluntary alliance seeks to share experience related to new IoT security risks and cooperate on embedded IoT security. Acknowledging the importance of considering security threats and weaknesses when designing and building services, we are providing active support for data security pre-assessment and IoT security test beds to ensure security is embedded throughout the entire development process of IoT products and services. Lastly, I would like to mention the balance between use and protection of personal data. While Andrew and Agni has mentioned data flow between countries, Well, I think this is very critical issue also. Customized and personalized smart services collect and analyze personal data to provide a service based on that data. This often leads to excessive use of data, which may cause privacy issues. Accordingly, the most important principle in protecting consumers in a smart society is minimizing collection of personal data. On the other hand, it is also important to use personal data to promote new services and foster relevant industry in a smart society. Ultimately, amending the relevant laws and regulations to strike a balance between protection and use of personal data is necessary. Building upon strengthened personal data protection in June 2016, and in order to promote the safe use of personal data, the Korean government announced the guidelines of personal information de-identification. Under these guidelines, any entity that wishes to utilize data with personal information without approval must go through strict de-identification measures. Additionally, the government clarified the scope of personal data in a comprehensive manual on the personal information protection law. Furthermore, the KCC, which is responsible for personal information protection policy line, is carrying out some measures. One of them is we would like to make it easy to international transfer of data. And then that can be a controversial issues between supporter and opponents regarding these issues. But basically, I think we should make it easy than right now to transport the data transfer. And anyway, in the near future, in Korea, we would like to make some amendments to the Network Promotion Act. Finally, I would like to add a few words before I conclude my views. The rapidly changing ICT environment and issues of cybersecurity in a smart society and personal data protection cannot be addressed by individual countries alone. I think these are issues that require policy coordination and creation of uniform regulations through bilateral and multilateral cooperation. Exchange of information and mutual cooperation between international organizations and regulatory bodies is very crucial to effectively respond to various cybersecurity issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Lee. Mohammed?
Yeah. Thank you. Let me start with the basic question is it really the industry which is transforming right now? I don't think so, because the biggest transformation in the communication industry happened long time ago, and that was when the internet started. It's just the broadband which has accelerated the pace. If you look at what's happening in the communication space, you see OTT as a new kid on the block, and then we have got IoT. And this is fundamentally changing the business model for the telcos. Telcos have been heavily relying on their voice business for quite a long time, and the biggest innovation in the last 100 years happened in the telco space was invention of SMS and MMS. MMS is dead, SMS is on ventilator, and that's exactly happening with the voice. What we see now is that the alternates are actually more user-friendly, they are better services, and that's why the adaptability is a lot. Just imagine the convenience of using SMS and WhatsApp or MMS or Viber and all this stuff, and you see. And even, let me, working as an operator, also admit that even some of those OTTs, those providing voice services, they actually have very good quality. And it's going to be very, very difficult for the operators to continue trying to protect the business for which they are asking for money and somebody else is practically providing it for free. So I think from that angle, there is a strong realization among the telcos. If I look at top 10 by market size and revenues globally, all telcos have digital ambitions. And they do have plans also. There are telcos who have started even having chief digital officer positions or chief transformation officer positions. And the debate which was happening 10 or 15 years ago of smart pipe, dumb pipe has become a debate of being digital service provider and operator who are trying to stay relevant by transforming their business. Now, as I just mentioned about the sad story of MMS and SMS, we are already seeing a decline on the voice business, especially on the international voice business. And that resulting into declining revenue, putting a cost pressure on the operators to innovate. So this transformation is not happening because we thought it's a good idea, because if we thought, we would have done it 15 years ago. But it's because of the declining revenue, we think that this is something which we have to do. And now the immediate reaction is that, okay, let's reduce the cost first, and then see that what else we can do to become more profitable, which is getting into either OTT space or providing some other digital services. So when we get this cost pressure, obviously, one of the areas, obviously, thanks to some of the solution providers, that network virtualization is happening. Then you have cloud-based solutions where you can have the whole telco in the cloud. You don't need to have a lot of people running around maintaining a few things. And that's where the other side, which is the rule maker or the regulator, they have started getting apprehensions because of losing control. Cross-border data is one example. Having the whole customer's private data outside the country. I mean, those kinds of fears. And what we see is when we try to engage with the regulators or the policymakers, that this is what probably the future model of future business model is. And what we see is traditionally the regulatory environment or the regulation is not catching up with the pace of the industry. And this we have seen at multiple levels and multiple times. And to the extent that innovation for an operator who is working in a licensed environment or the permission space is very small. If I simply compare just a startup and a licensed operator, and you would see that what we call it, that space is a 90-day sprint. If that small startup or an OTT player, they come up with a new service, they try it for a few days. If it doesn't pick up, they just kill it. Whereas on the other side, if you look at somebody who is a licensed operator in a particular jurisdiction, even to provide a new service, he needs to go through a long process of certain approvals, which is LI requirement, and then consumer protections, and the pricing, and then the social benefits and all this stuff. And if he thinks it's not picking up, nobody's using it, he wants to kill it, again he has to go through the same process, where he has to make sure that their consumer protection interests are there, and there's a permission to kill that service. So that's for me is probably, operators are obviously partly responsible, but also the environment, business environment, that is also partly responsible for a slow pace of innovation. And then there are certain things which we also see is artificial barrier, for example, licensing just reduce the number of licenses and try to auction it, or reduce the spectrum available and then try to sell it at a higher price. That also is causing a little bit challenge to the operators to work in that space. But on the other side, what we see is that the market structures or the design of the markets on the basis of which this whole framework and policy system works is also blurring. We do not have the kind of vertical or horizontal separation of markets. Now it's possible for OTT players, without a license, without caring for the market structure, provide comparable or a similar service as to the licensees or the telcos. One of my friends was saying that it's really bad that these OTT guys, they do not have the kind of investment which we make, and they're stealing our or eating our lunch. And being fair to OTT, I said, they are eating our lunch because they can have a hand on it. And we as telco are also eating lunch of banks. Look at the telcos who are into the financial services. M-Pesa is a great example. We also have a financial services, which is Easy Pesa. And in 2015 alone, 3% of the country's GDP was moved by this small payment service provider, which is us. So that shows that if you are innovative, if you have a space to innovate, we do that. And now look at some of the telcos who have digital ambitions. They are getting into health services, they are getting into agriculture, they're getting into education. There is a lot of space for everyone if they really want to innovate and to provide new services, to stay relevant in the market. The only challenge what I see is the permission space. If you have the permission space, you can do that. In one of a similar setting where actually I was trying to talk about the challenges and the environment and all this stuff, and what the message which was received by one of the regulators is saying that you guys have been terrible in innovation, and I'm sorry, we cannot help you. I said, I'm not saying that you need to help us and try to block the OTT, that's a bad idea. But what I'm suggesting is that it is for the regulators to stay relevant is more important than for the operators, because whether it's a simple access provider or smart pipe or dumb pipe, somebody will have to provide the access, and we are good at doing that. So we will stay relevant, but for the regulators to stay relevant, they also need to change the permission space or the environment on which they regulate. And yesterday I heard a joke from one of a regulator right here in this hall. There was a discussion about OTT and service providers, licensees. And he said that when there was an office and a guy was sitting outside the office as a security guard, and then everybody was going in, nobody was asking him. And then one guy just got in and says to the security guard, can I go in? And he said, no, you cannot go in. And he said, why? Everybody else is going. He says, they didn't ask me. You asked, you cannot go. And that's exactly the situation here, is that if you're a licensee, you're not allowed to do certain things. But if you're not a licensee and you don't ask, you probably can get away with many things. But the good thing about this joke is that at least some of the regulators do have sense of humor. That's very encouraging for future. So what I think is that who got it right, before coming here, I had been actually looking at various policies, regulations, frameworks in many countries in Asia and Europe. And obviously, most of the things which we see is either happens in Europe and West. Obviously, not everything good happens there. I didn't see anything which I could quote here as a good example. That doesn't mean that nothing is happening. There are a lot of good things and good works are happening. But and obviously, I don't have answers to the questions which I'm trying to raise. But one thing I think is, as what we can do right is, I can suggest that if we agree on just one principle, that would be extremely helpful. And that principle is, if it's a similar service, there should be similar rules for that service, for all the players. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. Go on, please.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for having me here today and giving me an opportunity to share with you some reflections on regulatory aspects and the industry transformation seen by us at Ericsson. We're certainly going through an unprecedented transformation, not only of industry and economy, but of the whole society. But we are only at the beginning of that, and regulations and the regulatory work and the regulatory community will not only be dealing with housekeeping matters going forward. It will require a lot more from regulators in terms of being proactive and understanding what is going on and how we can use new technology to the benefit of society and also eliminate or limit the negative possible impacts. But in order to understand the future a little bit better, it's always good to look at history and learn from history. We have had an electrical grid which covers pretty much all urban areas in the world, and it has taken close to 100 years to build that. Today we have a broadband network that covers pretty much the same surface of the earth, but it has taken maybe a little bit more than 10 years to build that. Electricity is something we take for granted. We wouldn't be sitting here having this conference if it wasn't for electricity, but I'm sure no one in here have given that a thought. And the same happens now with ICT. We're using ICT in every aspect of life, government functions, the commercial life, transportation, health, you name it. And this is, of course, a revolution that has been taking place over a short time. But we're just at the beginning of it, and we're talking about IoT and the future and how we will use this new technology. And I think that the real progress and the real development will take place only if we combine technology breakthroughs in other scientific areas. IoT as a phenomena, I would like to call it, will not happen unless we take use of our other sciences and other technologies. If you look at what IoT is today, those areas, you take for instance wearables, they're using a lot of other technology. The radio part of it and the broadband part of it is existing technology that hasn't really done anything to IoT. It's more accelerators, optical features, etc. That is making it exciting. So let me try to exemplify what I'm trying to say. First of all, I'd like to mention a little bit about the next generation of wireless technology. I'm not going to give you a technology lesson here, but it's important for you to understand that what we refer to as the fifth generation wireless technology is very different from what we have had so far. There are certain features there that opens up new possibilities. And I'd like to start with saying that the architecture of a 5G network is very different from the call it traditional 4G, 3G, etc. It's not just a macro network with base stations sitting in towers providing a radio coverage over a certain area. The networks will be a lot more dynamically architectured. They will be on different levels. There will be the macro network, but there will be lower level networks, micro networks also. Even your devices, whether it's smartphones or sensors or other devices, cameras, etc., they will communicate directly with each other. And why is that important? Well, take for instance something that Ericsson is working with today together with a truck manufacturer called Scania. area, we're developing a what we call a platooning feature, where actually long-haul trucks can drive in long convoys on highways with only a few meters distance in between each others. That means that there has to be a very, very instant communication from track to track, so that when the first track decelerates or brakes, all the other tracks have to do it at the same time, and then trucks can drop off from the convoy and go off to its nearby destination. A new track can join the train and continue. We're doing this because it will reduce fuel consumption significantly because of lower air drag, cost of operation, etc. A lot of positive aspects. So that's one thing. Latency is another thing which is very important for opening up for new possibilities. Remote control, for instance, is actually possible today, combining virtual reality technology with 5G. You can operate a digger or a machine of some kind remotely, which is opening up new applications in, for instance, working in hazardous areas, in minings, in nuclear plants, in remote areas, and so on. So this is another good example how you combine, say, for instance, virtual reality with ICT. One area that is very interesting and a technology that is rapidly being developed now is nanotechnology. With nanotechnology, it's possible not only to miniaturize electronics and electronic devices, but you can also develop materials with whatever characteristics that you want it to have. So this opens up for possibilities together with another feature of the 5G, that you can actually lower the power consumption dramatically. So instead of having to charge something very regularly, you have a battery lifetime or power lifetime of a year or two. So you can actually implant devices, sensors that's been developed by means of nanotechnology, electronics that's been miniaturized by nanotechnology. You can implant that in your body and monitor important functions of the body, such as your heart function, your insulin, your cholesterol level, your oxygen intake, things like that, which will have ripple effects on society, in the sense that life expectancy, you can cure more medical conditions, you can increase life expectancy, which in its turn has impact on other things. You can offload hospitals and so on, and you can predict conditions before they really happens. With nanotechnology, with the materials you can actually develop a shirt that is connected to the IoT network. So a shirt that also can sense what's going on in your body. It can measure your heart rate, your temperature. It can also maybe measure and monitor the environment you are in, the pollution in the environment you are, the UV exposure, and warn you to get out of the sun when you've been out too long, and things like that. I mean, these are all imaginations and the result of our own fantasy in Ericsson. I'm just trying to exemplify here how the world will actually look very different from what it does today. Artificial intelligence is interesting, because if you look, you only need to go to YouTube today to see that robots are being built really with same anatomic features that a human being. You see robots walking around. Put artificial intelligence into that, you can actually develop cadres or robots that can take over certain roles in society. You could have a firefighter robot walking into a burning house, and you can have an operator sitting in a safe location and following that robot. The robot, using artificial intelligence, will find its way to the place where the victims are, and then you can take over as an operator and decide which victim to bring out first and what to do, etc. So these are fantastically exciting areas. The same goes for surgery. You can actually have a hybrid version of a robot doing the operation with an expert sitting and virtually being in the operator theater, also letting the robot do the the simple part of the operation, opening up the patients, etc. And then you step in and do the real surgeon steps in and do the final, more critical parts. Imagine, for instance, that you have these, you have cameras with that artificial intelligence today that monitor, say, a public area, an airport, where people are being monitored, and someone showing signs of a heart attack, which happens unfortunately too often, particularly in airports. You can have intelligent software really predicting or seeing or recognizing that this is probably a very great likelihood a heart attack taking place. A robot is dispatched from a corner of the airport. The robot has built-in defibrillators, oxygen tubes, etc. And actually dealing with a heart attack is pretty standard today. What to do? You need to check if there is a pulse. If there is no pulse, you need to start the heart again. You need to oxygen the blood, etc. So these are all services that sounds very scientific-ish, but they are very possible with the new technology that is coming around. Another area, I brought it up yesterday in one of the workshops, is where there is an interesting future is in the blockchain technology or the blockchain internet protocol. Blockchain is something you probably have heard about it. Some of you may be knowing a lot more than I do, but blockchain is a possibility of safely transfer files across the internet, and it has the potential of actually replacing banks and intermediaries in all kinds of transfer of assets. I had this discussion with my CTO a few days ago, and he claims that what happened. I mean, I was watching Edward Snowden, the Snowden movie the other night, and this would not have been possible. It would not have been possible to secretly surveil a whole population of mobile phones and mobile traffic if blockchain had been used. And we actually, from Ericsson's side, looking at how we can possibly implement or integrate that kind of technology in our networks in the future. But of course, again, ripple effects. This will impact the society completely. If the banks are no longer relevant in the transfer of assets, how is that going to implement? All these things creates a lot of questions and puts a lot of demand on the regulatory community. And that is really my point here. And it's not only simple, say, societal and technical questions. We end up in moral dilemmas as well. Take, for instance, the driverless cars or the autonomous cars. There will be a situation where actually the software will have to make decisions on life or death. If you have a human driver sitting behind the steering wheel, he will in a split second decide whether he will run over the pedestrian or run the car over a cliff. Imagine you have a computer doing that. Who programs the computer to take the right decision, and what would be the moral guidelines and the ethical guidelines to develop that algorithm? Is it up to the programmer himself or the software developer himself to decide what would be the right decision? If it's for school children in the car and an old man, should that make a difference? Or if it's an old man sitting in the car and 4 school children supposed to be or possibly being run over, that sort of decisions. And companies are today, and organizations are putting together committees, what they call moral committees, to have these discussions. The case with the driverless car is the only one. There will be many of these where we have to expand our thinking from being technical to much more humanistic. So my final word here is that we, in this regulatory community, we'll have to find ways of working together between the industry, the regulators, the governments, and the academia, and try to sort these questions out and try to find answers to them and try to develop the guidelines. I think I will end there and see if this has hopefully contributed to any food of thoughts among you.
Thank you very much, Johan.